Hello, everybody. It's Saturday night at 9:30, which is not the usual time we do Starfleet Tactical, but I'm Chris Weave, and this is Starfleet Tactical, and I'm here with guests, and as you can see, this is not my apartment. That's because we are at a science fiction convention, MarsCon in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and this is the special edition that we are doing for the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. And I have with me Peter Gold, who's been on the show previously. I have Tom Pope, who you've all heard about for 2+ years now, 3 years, whatever. And Jacob Holo, who is a first-time join on the show, but I hope he gets to come back later when some of his new novels come out. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing here in Norfolk and how the Virginia Beach, Norfolk, et cetera, they're all one place, about what we've been up to here, our adventures climbing all over the USS Wisconsin, and then we're also going to talk about the various projects that we're all working on. And because we're sort of set up in the hotel room the way that we're set up, we had two options. We could have moved the camera way far back and made some people even smaller than they are on screen, or we could just live with the fact that I'm going to be off to one side and not really be on the screen. And I just made a command decision that I'm going to sit over on one side because anybody who's watching this live or later has probably seen me 1,000 times. If you've got questions, or at least 129 times plus the 3 that we did before that, before we were officially a show. So if anybody's got any questions, just go ahead and put them in the comment section, the chat log, and I'll see them here and we'll answer questions as they come up. So let's see. Do we want to start with projects, or do we want to start with climbing on the ship?
Climbing on the ship. Yeah,
climbing on the ship. Okay, we're going to do this in chronological order, people.
Yeah.
So Tom lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I stopped and picked him up when we came in on Wednesday night. And then Thursday, we met Jacob and his wife Heather, and all of us plus Heather went and climbed all over the USS Wisconsin, which is an Iowa-class battleship. So Peter, you've been on battleships before. Have you been on this one?
Yes. But I have not done the engineering tour nor the command and control tour before.
So, what did it say? Turn off your phone. Turn off your phone, or turn off your sound anyway.
Well, I thought I had sound off.
Yeah, well, that happens. That happens.
Right. So we're doing good.
There are 2 types of guests on Starfleet Tactical: those who have had an issue with leaving their sound on, and those who are going to have an issue with leaving their sound on. And oh, hey, Fred. So Fred Kish, another BU9 members here. Tom and Peter and I are all members of BU9, and so that's I won't say that's how we know each other, because we knew each other first and then we became together in BU9, but that's how that works out. So you lived here.
Yes.
Because Peter, as you may recall, is a merchant mariner. He came in and talked about rotary container ships, and we talked about well, I guess I talked about rotary container ships, but you were one of the guys who was there and helped create that thing.
Yes.
And then we talked about merchant marine stuff a couple of times on the show, trade in the Omniverse, things like that. So you've been on the Wisconsin, I assume, before this, because
yes.
You live nearby.
Yes.
And you've been on the Massachusetts.
Yes, and the Alabama.
And the Alabama. Okay,
and the New Jersey when she was active. And
the New Jersey when she was active.
Yes.
That's because Peter's really old. Really old. No, he's only a little bit older than I am. I'm old enough that I could have been on the New Jersey when she was active.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been on I've been in all 4 of those, but only the New Jersey after she was inactivated. I've seen the Missouri from I was on one ship and she was moored at Pearl Harbor as we were coming into port. Tom, what about you? What have you been on?
Just the ships that we went on and some of the BU9 annual meetings, the earlier ones we were calling honor cons. I've been in a Ticonderoga, a couple of Berks, and I spent a couple of days, thanks to Andy Presby, on the carrier.
You did not do a Tycho with me. You must have done that with Bill.
Oh, yeah, the Tycho was
Honor Con 0.
Yes.
Honor Con 0. Okay, yes. So he did a Tycho without the rest of us, but we did a Berk. This was the famous the first meeting where we had anything that looked like a critical mass, Honor Con 1. we got a bunch of people together here, and we went and climbed over a bunch of ships, and then we went back to the Hampton Inn in Norfolk, and Andy Presby disconnected their main monitor and hooked up his laptop to do a presentation to David Weber and the rest of us. And the front desk staff didn't even bat an eye as Andy began reconfiguring their gear. And we were all really impressed by that. I didn't find out until later that Andy and his wife Joelle had actually lived in that hotel for 3 months within, like, they had just moved out like a month previously, because when they lived in Norfolk, they had a house that was on a floodplain. And so it was so bad that eventually the insurance company said, why don't we just pay to raise your house, put your house up on stilts, because it's easier than having to constantly redo your house. So so we saw a submarine, and we saw
Los Angeles as well.
A Los Angeles class submarine, and we saw a Burke on that trip, and we did a lot of sightseeing pier side, just looking at other stuff. So Jacob, have you ever been on a ship like this?
This is the first battleship that I've ever been on. I was on an aircraft carrier once, but this was many, many years ago, and I do not remember that particular family vacation particularly well.
Okay.
But so this is, you know, the first, you know, ship like this that I've been on as an adult.
So, and they treated us really well.
Oh my goodness!
Yes.
So we paid for both of the tours. They were like, what, $35 each or something like that? $20 each. So we paid for each of the 90-minute tours. And then in between the two 90-minute tours, we got another hour tour because the tour guide just kind of liked us. And so we came back because we wanted to go see the lower turret area, because I think that that's one of the coolest parts of the battleship. It's basically the interface between the magazines and how you get all the stuff up to the part of the turret that's above the deck. Most people don't realize that on a battleship like that, the turret is 5 stories tall, 4 or 5 stories tall. And all you're seeing is the penthouse, which is where the guns are. And I totally misremembered, because I'd been on this battleship a year ago. I've done Alabama and Massachusetts within the last 4 or 5 months, and I had totally forgotten this is the one where you can't get to that stuff. The Alabama and the Massachusetts, you can climb all over the lower turret, but they don't have that open here, and so we didn't get a chance to go see that. But as a consolation prize, our tour instructor said, "Do you want to go see X? Do you want to go see Y? Do you want to go see Z?" And then
we were all like, "Yes, please."
Yes, please. And so we went and did that, and then we came back, and it's like, okay, now we have to go back for the tour. And so we all went back to the starting place. We rested a little bit, and then we went back to the starting place and picked up another guy who was actually a pretty cool guy, and we went and did all the tours, and that worked out really well. And so ACDC crowd may not be aware of this, but our normal, I frequently talk about battleships on this show, because I always say that my fandom superpower is that I can talk about real world navies and science fiction navies at the same time. So if you go back and you look at some of the past episodes, I spend a lot of time talking about the development of naval tactics in the interwar period, and the role of naval doctrine and things like that. So you really can't get me not to talk about those things. So this was a good sort of capstone for that. So anything else that we want to say about I guess it's probably worth saying about the Wisconsin. Wisconsin is weird. All the Iowas are weird in that they brought them all back in the 1980s. And so they're this weird mix of the cutting edge of 1980s technology. Like if you want to see a TRS-80 in the wild, you can see one on board this battleship. A couple of them. So they're a mix of 1980s technology, plus they also have all the 1940s technology. And so the steam plants, like all 1940s, required 10,000 guys to run. That's an exaggeration. It's actually more like 800, if I remember correctly. Wasn't that the number?
450 total.
450 total?
Between the four boiler rooms, 4 engine rooms, and other support.
I'll note for the record, as a merchant mariner, he's actually not just a merchant mariner, he is specifically an engineer. And so there was a really, really interesting interplay between the retired Army colonel who was leading us through this, and who's got like 2,000 volunteer hours there, and Peter, who's qualified on steam plants, etc., and can show all the stuff and point out things, etc. So it was a learning experience for everybody, including the tour guide. So
Yeah, we actually covered the Iowa steam plant system extensively in college at the academy.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so he was the right guy to be there.
So when we're looking at 4 watches, that's actually 100 people. Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
100 people. Once you leave 50 or so elsewhere, so about 100 people down where we were standing.
Yeah.
And that's 8 rooms. That's about 10 to 12 per space. Did they bias more towards steam versus engine, or? For any
Probably
given
not.
watch? Okay, so about 10 to 12 per
Yeah.
steam room, 10 to 12 per engine room.
Yeah.
4 of each. Okay.
Yeah,
So it adds up quick when you're looking
Yeah.
at different watch standards and having to run this thing 24 hours a day. It's a lot different than.
yeah, and that actually goes to the entire question of manning, which we occasionally talk about in Starfleet Tactical. We've talked about how when we, the United States of America, sold the Perry class frigate to the Australians, they immediately cut the crew by like 40%. And it's sort of like, why were they able to do that? And the answer is the U.S. Navy has a different standard than the Australians did for how many people you had to have on watch, et cetera, et cetera. U.S. Navy standard was always you had to be able to get underway with the guys that you had on watch at the time. So if you're in the shipyard, or not the shipyard, because you're not getting underway if you're in the shipyard, but if you're pierside and you get orders to get underway as fast as you can. If you're a steam plant, it's going to take you a while to raise steam. But if you're a gas turbine plant, you might be casting off lines. Your limitation on when you cast off lines is going to be how fast you can run through your checklist and how fast you can get permission from the port to start moving, and it tugs if you need it. And so from that standpoint, we had this requirement that you had to have a certain minimum number of people on duty. The Australians just don't follow that requirement. So they resign themselves to the fact that they won't be able to get underway unless they call people back. We have a requirement that you have to be able to maintain all warfare areas 24/7, whereas the Australians, I guess we don't fight at night. And that's if you remember the building the Navy talk that I did 2 years ago now. I mean, I think it was like episode number 40 or something. If you remember the building a Navy talk, one of the things I talk about is manning policy, right? This is one of those things that can really affect your numbers. If every ship out there has 40% more people or 40% less people, or however you want to do the math on that, you can find yourself in a situation where you're coming close to doubling the size of the folks that are on the fleet, right? And those of us that are all BU9 members, Jacob's not technically a BU9 member, except, he doesn't know this, but we're going to make him get the tattoo later. If you remember from reading the David Weber's Honorverse books, there was a point at which Manticore had to change their manning policy because they just didn't have enough bodies to go around. And they started manning their ships differently. And as you would expect, it had implications later on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and there are some transitional periods in the Star Kingdom where they look at four watches. They look at 3 watches, and all of the pros and cons of each of those 3x8 or 4x6, and all sorts of different things like that. Those have effects too.
Yeah.
Now, at least the way it used to work in the U.S. Navy is that how many watch sections you had was really kind of a CO decision. Or a department head decision, actually. I think it might be a department head decision because a former surface warfare officer I know talks about how he came in and he took over, and he wanted to do things differently than how his predecessors did it. And that led to some consternation because change is bad. I'm sure that when the next guy wanted to change it back, change is bad that way too. And so, there was a little bit of consternation there, and he had to sort of poke him to get him to do it his way. And, if you go back and you look at the episode with Captain Jellicoe on board the Enterprise, what was the first thing he did? He said, I can't remember if he went from 4 watches to 3 or 3 to 4, but one of the first things he did was change the watch bell. Because he wanted to do it a different way. So, okay. So, anything else we want to say about Wisconsin or anything else like that?
I can go into some details.
Do we want to talk about the glasses?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
In the bilge?
Yes.
So that
we got star service from that.
Yeah, we really did. We really did get star service. Do you want to tell the story?
So my wife, Heather HP Holo, she was touring the Wisconsin with us, and she had her brand new fancy sunglasses up in her hair, and
we're literally leaving. This is the end of the day. Only thing, they're going to close the ship down, and the only thing we have to do is we are literally like we were standing on the deck that's right above the bilge. We were 3 feet from the bottom of the ship, getting ready to climb our ass up the 4 flights of stairs so that we could get out. And then
so she starts climbing, and there's ventilation coming down. It's pretty strong, and it blows her glasses off, and they dink 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 down straight into the bilge,
right past the reduction gear,
right past everything, every obstruction out of the way, maybe a little glancing hit, but it ends up in the bilge.
Because I've talked previously on the show about how there are parts of the ship up high that look like a building, right? You've got these corridors, you've got rooms off to the side, etc. But when you get down into the engineering spaces, it's a lot of big ass gear with sort of like catwalks in between it all. And so there's lots of open spaces, etc. You've really got to watch your feet. It's quite possible that if you're trying to get out of the way of somebody else, you might actually step off the floor into a big gaping hole. I don't want to make it sound like there's just holes in the middle of the deck. It's not. It's like there's a big piece of gear and there's a railing, but if you're not careful, you still could put your foot off of it. And so we're in the part of the ship that's really big pieces of gear and sort of catwalks. And so it just sort of bounced down in between the holes and ended up down at the very bottom of the ship. And so so there was a rescue team deployed. And so
Heather thought that these glasses are lost, and
she'd had them for what, like a day?
Those are like extra fancy sunglasses that she had ordered online. She'd got them, I don't know, the week prior, but given my wife's tendencies, she actually had 2 backup pairs of sunglasses in case she lost that one, because she loses sunglasses all the time, just not quite as dramatically as making a contribution to the USS Wisconsin's bilge.
Well, I started referring to it as a payment in kind, an in-kind donation, I think is how I phrase it, an in-kind donation.
So we all think, okay, there's no way they're getting that out. They're gone. But no, that our tour guides, Doug and Ed, are like, no, give us your contact information. We'll see if we can fish it out.
Yeah, we found them. We could see where they were, and just not really accessible.
Well, if you had 2 elbows and a 6-foot-long arm, so I'm blaming you, Peter, for not having 2 elbows and a 6-foot-long arm. And so it worked out really well. I mean, and this was a very interesting tour situation, because the tour guide, he's making small talk as we're waiting for people. Oh, what do you do? Oh, it's authors. Oh, science fiction. I love science fiction, et cetera, et cetera. I especially like the part where Ed asked your wife about what she writes, and then he said, well, my wife is an author, and then oh yeah, what's her name? Oh, I love her. So there was total fangirl stuff going on there. That was kind of nifty to watch too.
Yeah, I don't even remember his wife's name.
I don't either. Young adult, not science fiction.
Yeah, it was she's a young adult author, and just just the fact that Heather was hanging around her husband it just blew her mind. She was just like, oh. You know, that was like the face that she made when she heard that. Yeah, they contacted us the next day.
Yeah.
That they had fished the glasses out of the bilge, and then they brought the glasses over to the convention.
Ed said that he thought he had a tool that could get to it, and so apparently he
was
did.
right.
Yeah,
he was right. And so
Doug, who dropped off the glasses, left with a very generous stack of books.
That's good.
So some of my stuff, some of Heather's stuff, and House of Steel.
2 copies.
2 copies of
Two
House.
copies.
Two
Excellent.
Yep. So one for each tour guy, and they're actually going to share them around the ship.
Good.
That was great.
Yeah, so
that
hopefully-
was great.
I had a policy back when I worked with, not for, but with the Navy. Whenever I'd go to sea, I always made a donation to the ship's library. And so this was before I was doing Honor Harrington stuff, so no copies of Honor Harrington stuff, but the Exordium series by Dave Trowbridge and Sherwood Smith, which I still intend to do a read along with y'all at some point. A couple of copies of that signed by David Sherwood, and also the omnibus edition of the first 3 Liaden novels had just come out. And the guy at Misha Merlin, whose name escapes me right now, when I told him what I wanted to do, he said, "Oh, I'll pay the shipping on this because this is really cool, and I'm glad that you're doing it, et cetera, et cetera." So I made a point of doing that. Aircraft carriers have pretty extensive libraries. Small boys escorts, not so much. And so, this was sort of a meaningful addition to their library, I hope. And I hope they're still being used. Although Vincennes has been decommissioned. That's the only ship that I actually did sea time on that's not around anymore. So I don't know what's going on with that. Let's see. We in BU9 we did do a tour of the Olympia during the time period where we went there because they were threatening to tow her out to sea and sink her because they didn't have any money. That threat was proved pretty hollow when they discovered that she was so badly silted in that they actually couldn't tow her out to sea. I don't know what they would have done in this situation because they can't just let her sink pierside. I think doesn't that violate some Coast Guard rules if you just let a ship sink pierside?
EPA rules, probably, not Coast Guard.
Okay.
Because it becomes an abandoned vessel.
Yeah, so
so somebody's going to be on the hook for removal, but I don't think it's actually illegal.
So it was kind of interesting there for a while, but somebody came along, their bluff eventually worked, and they convinced somebody to give them a bunch of money, and they're still open. So you can see the Battleship New Jersey, which is in Camden, New Jersey, and the Olympia in Philadelphia. They're right across from each other, and Olympia also has a World War II submarine there because most ships seem to have a World War II submarine someplace nearby that you can go visit. So. Anything else in Wisconsin, the tour? Okay. How about the con? How's the con been going for you guys?
Good.
Great.
Yeah.
So lots of meetings with various people. I had breakfast with Phil Pornell this morning, Jerry Pornell's son, who I know I first met through gaming mailing lists, and then I worked with him professionally. He was a naval officer, and he's a professional war gamer now. And so it is literally the case that I can go to a professional wargaming conference and run into Phil, or a hobby wargaming convention and run into Phil, or a science fiction convention and run into Phil, which is sort of kind of fun. So I saw him, and David Weber was hanging around, and you guys had lots of business talk with David Weber because they both write books with David, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Anything else notable from the con?
No, hang around with the TRMN people, the fan club, Honorverse fan club people.
Yeah, we're going to go see later on if they're rolling pods or not tonight. We don't. We suspect they might be somewhere, but we don't know exactly where. So we'll go check that out.
I didn't mess up my presentation during the Bain Roadshow like I did last time.
How'd you mess it up the last time?
Or something?
Oh no. So the previous Bain Roadshow that I did, I think was it Liberty Con? Anyway. So whichever con it was at, they're bringing up Growing Division books, collaborations between me and David Weber, and
he's going to talk about those later.
Going through that, and then they get to my solo novel, The Dyson File, and I say, and my first traditionally published solo novel is coming out, and people started clapping, and then I handed off the mic without actually talking about my book or trying to tell people why they might want to read it. and I sit down, and they're like, wait a second, I forgot a step there. So this time I actually told people why they should be interested in my books.
So if you've never been to a science fiction convention where Baen has a presence, Baen always does this thing called the Baen Roadshow, where it's usually about 90 minutes long. All the Baen authors who are at the con go to the roadshow, and they all stand up and talk about what they've got coming up, what they have coming up, and the Baen people who are there doing the presentation talk about other Baen books that are currently on the schedule, and they give away free books. So it's kind of interesting. You can go and they give away free books. Did you notice that they gave away free books?
I think I saw them giving away free books, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Quite a few, actually.
Yeah, they do. They do,
Yeah.
because they know that word of mouth is a big deal. So I'm going to throw up a comment from Fred here. So Fred says, "Oh Lord, rolling pods. Thomas Maroney still probably has a hangover from that." So that could very well be the case.
Yeah. So yeah, my daughter's high school loved all the books that Baen gave me to give to them.
So yeah,
From the
and
roadshows.
and one of the things that they do at the roadshow is if you're a librarian or a teacher, they just basically say, "Come up and pick up what you want."
Yeah.
Because they're big into that. So,
and people who have served in the military as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Or
Great.
first responder types.
Mhm.
So they're
Yep.
really big on that. Okay, anything else about the con per se?
I think we move on.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about what you guys have written, and let's start with Jacob. So, yesterday when we were having dinner, I said something about you writing a book with your brother. I figured out where I got crosswise.
Okay.
Because I went back and I went, how did I get that wrong? And I was reading the description, and the book is about two brothers, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I put two and two together and got 22 and got it all screwed up in my head. So was that your first novel?
So what the book you're referring to is The Dragons of Jupiter.
Yes.
And it's military science fiction. It was the first book that my wife and I released. It's in our self-publishing efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the first one that I wrote chronologically of what we have published. So I might as well go in publication order.
Yeah.
So The Dragons of Jupiter. It's a tale of two brothers on opposite sides of a war that spanned the solar system, and it's I for the longest time I've kind of wanted to get back to it, but I've always had other projects to work on, so it's just been this standalone that's sort of sat there.
but seemed to get pretty good reviews. Because I will admit that when Tom first told me about you, it's like who is this guy? And then when I went and looked, oh, it's that guy. Because I remember getting, I haven't read it yet, but I bought the book right away because it had really good reviews. Now, for the record, how many actual fire-breathing dragons are in this novel?
None. There are two. So the two brothers are each with these kind of elite commando units.
Okay.
And one of them is called the Dragons.
Okay.
And
I wanted to emphasize that. So if you had if anybody out there having an allergic reaction to a fantasy monster in their science fiction, it's okay.
Yeah,
Put the EpiPen down. It'll be okay.
If we had it to do over again, we probably would have given it a different title to better communicate the content of the book. But we were new and didn't know what we were doing.
Well, the thing is, if you see the cover, you might suspect, and if you read the description, it becomes very apparent very quickly that dragons is just the name of the unit. You know, they're dragons in the same way that Pappy Boyington's units were sheep. So okay, so that was the first one.
Yeah.
Then what'd you do?
So then there was Time Reavers, which
Okay.
was something completely different. So during that period, I wrote Time Reavers before I wrote Dragons. And I was going through a process of kind of redeveloping my writing style and how I approach prose. And so it was, for me, it was sort of an experimentation. And also just completely trying out a new genre. It's urban fantasy-ish. It's a weird duck. Okay, so it's kind of sci-fi, but not enough to appeal to sci-fi fans. It's kind of urban fantasy, but not enough to appeal to urban fantasy fans. And it's kind of horror, but not enough to appeal to horror fans. So it's like straddling those three in the worst possible way, and just never found its audience.
You know, that can happen, but did you learn from the experience?
Yes, and I think that I was kind of experimenting with, you know, like I said, with playing with my writing style, and the end result for me was the Dragons of Jupiter, which was kind of a refinement of me going through that process of sort of redeveloping my writing style. And that particular book is much more representative of my later works and the stuff that I've been writing with David. Obviously, there's been a lot that I have learned from the Weber because, well, yep. Duh. But the kernel of my current author voice, writing style, is evident within the Dragons of Jupiter.
Okay, so what did you do after? So you wrote Time Reavers first, published it second. What was the third book?
So the third book, and we can actually talk about the next three as a group, were all written before Time Reavers, and it's called the Seraphim Revival because Heather and I were horrible at naming things. And naming things that were appropriate to the genre that we're trying to sell it in. So the three novels, Bane of the Dead, Throne of the Dead, and Disciple of the Dead, have nothing to do with zombies. They are actually the giant robot novels. So there are giant robots fueled by the pilot's own soul and commanded by the society's honored dead, who are still around to command it. So these are fairly ridiculous. It's science fantasy, and these are giant robots that are fighting hand to hand in space. So that gives you an idea of, all right, so what happened?
I'm going to go out on a limb here. Let me ask you a question. I'm going to go out on a limb here. Are you perhaps a fan of both Warhammer 40K and Gundam?
Yes. You didn't have to ask.
Okay, please continue.
So what happened? What happened to lead to this series is that 4-ish properties all had a party in my brain. The first one, and this is in no particular order. First one would be Gundam Wing, so the series. Then there was Neon Genesis Evangelion, another mecha series. Then there was a video game, original PlayStation, I believe. Yeah. Called Xenogears.
Okay. You recommended to me that a long time ago.
And and then maybe with a splash of Dragon Ball Z as well. And they all had this party in my brain, and a trilogy of giant robot novels popped out. And the weird thing is that these giant robot novels that are basically representative of my very earliest works that I would consider publishable.
Mm-hmm.
Of those 5, those 3 have sold the best.
Okay. The titles might not lead somebody to it, but once you got to the description, if that's what you're looking for, that's the right answer.
The cover and the description makes it clear what the content is, because you got this big giant robot on the cover. But yeah, that's my early work. That's okay. And then so after that is actually my first collaboration, not with David yet, but with my wife.
Okay.
So she wrote most of a novel. This is steampunk fantasy called The Wizard's Way. It involves a young inventor who is secretly a wizard in a city where wizards are lynched and where inventors are being murdered. And he also has this kind of homicidal monster inside of him that gets out when he's under a lot of stress, and he's under a lot of stress because of points A and B that I just mentioned.
Yeah.
But he has to team up with his murdered mentor's swashbuckling pug butler to solve the mystery of the murders and to save their city from a sinister plot to destroy it. So yeah, not really related to anything else that I'd written previously. But Heather was at the time was kind of struggling to close the deal on the manuscript. She had, most of the bones there, most of the meat there, but needed someone to kind of wrangle it. And well, I was married to her, and I had experience, writing. So
congratulations, you're a winner.
So I'm like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And a month later, we had a finished manuscript, and so that's why even though she wrote, the first draft, I kind of rewrote about 25% of it is what we estimate, and so that became our first collaboration together.
Well, glad that works, because collaborations have been described as unnatural acts, and there are many marriages who wouldn't survive a collaboration attempt. Although Steve Miller and Sharon Lee seem to be doing fine. So in case you were wondering what that flash was, everybody, that was me discovering the length of time that this particular battery will hold out. And the answer is 37 minutes is how long a full charge on this battery for this battery powered light will hold out. So okay, so you wrote that, and then what else do you have?
All right, so after that, I wrote 2 novels that I was unsuccessful in selling to anyone. And they're sitting on shelves right now. So we're just going to skip over that.
Okay.
And then I think, okay, so those manuscripts I had submitted to Bain. And I submitted them to Bain after I had first met David Weber. And so when they came back, and whole other long story, my wife and I became really good friends with David and his wife Sharon. So when that rejection came back, said, "Hey, David, would you mind taking a look at this manuscript and tell me where you feel that I need to improve as an author?" It's like, "Oh yeah, sure, I can do that. I'll need to find time in my, time in my busy schedule, but yes, I'll find it won't be immediate, but yes, I'll take a look at it." So we were out to dinner, all four of us, and we were, I think we were at like a Chili's or something. We were celebrating Heather's birthday. And I once again thank David for, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to look at this manuscript and tell me where you think I need to improve my craft. Then he started smiling, and it was just like it was just a very mischievous smile. and then he said, "You know what? I think we should write a novel together." And I eventually picked my job off the floor. And he already had a concept in mind, which became the Gordian Protocol. He had actually mentioned that concept to me and Heather at a previous time, so I was already familiar with that story concept that he had.
Is this one of the ones from the list?
Yeah. This is one of the ones from like the legendary list of 10 proposals that he gave.
And I do remember him talking about that and talking about how he found a co-author, and you were just a name to me at that point. And he was very excited about it, and he was like, "Yeah, this is this thing that I've been working on forever. I found a co-author." Yeah. So
the list that we were referring to is way back in the early days of Weber's relationship with Bain, when they finally realized that everything that David wrote ended up getting a sequel to it. It was sort of like, why don't we plan this out? And so, David, do you have any ideas on things that you might want to turn into series? And so David gave a list of 10, I think it was around 10 ideas to Jim Bain. And Jim Bain said, "I want this one." And that one was Honor Harrington. But that didn't stop David from trying to do all 10 of them. And so basically everything that David has done, I think, is everything that he's done as a series been something off the list? I don't think he's done anything that's been a series that hasn't.
I think so too.
Yeah. With the possible exception of the werewolf one. What was the werewolf vampire one?
Out of the Dark.
Out of the Dark. I don't.
And the Challenge Heaven comes out supposedly soon. It just got a review.
Yeah, so Out of the Dark was intended as a standalone. David found out it was a series when he got the hard copy, and it said beginning of a new series by David Weber. That was when David found out that he was writing a series. But I
safe assumption for the guy whoever wrote that.
Yeah,
Only took 20 plus years.
So, but that's just how that works. So I remember the very first time I saw David, somebody asked him the question, it might have been me actually, whether there was ever going to be a sequel to Path of the Fury. And in intricate detail, he explained about how he needed another series, like he needed a hole in the head. And that was about 4 or 5 series ago. So, so that's pretty standard. Okay, so tell us about the Gordian Protocol then and its sequels.
So the Gordian Protocol, the basic premise is that you have two historians, one from the 30th century, one from our modern age, that have to team up and change the past in order to save the future. It's kind of the elevator pitch that I give. But there are some very unfriendly people who have militarized time machines that do not want them to succeed. And there's also it's got a really good moral question in it that I really can't go into without spoiling things.
Okay, fair enough.
But one of the characters who knows through circumstances, he knows where the timelines branched and what needs to be put back. And he does not want to put it back because of how horrible the original version was.
Yeah.
And so that character kind of has to a certain degree, take on, he's got to do it. He has to, take on the moral burden of, putting that horrible event back the way it was in order to allow, basically the timeline not to implode upon itself, essentially.
And as I understand it, when you say militarized time travel, you're talking about militarized time traveling spacecraft.
Yes.
Yeah. So if David Weber isn't David Weber enough, this is how David Weber can be even more David Weber. Did I get that explanation correct?
Yeah,
well,
I think once you had 4-dimensional combat, that
well,
yeah.
The implications for the number of Starfleet tactical episodes is outstanding. So
in fairness to David, the military, the heavily armed time machines were actually my contribution.
Oh, wonderful!
I'm sure he fought you really hard on that.
Oh no,
that's fantastic.
There's like approved.
So I have not read these yet because it was billed from the very beginning as being a series. I mean, it said it on the cover. I think it said it on the cover. I mean, I certainly heard that from David, and so I have a policy of not starting series. I don't start a series until at least book 3 is out.
Well, actually, the first book, the Guardian Protocol, on its original cover, and I think it might still be on like the mass market. It says new standalone from best-selling.
Oh really?
Oh yeah, it says standalone on it.
By the time I talked with David about it, it was.
Or no, it might have been in the book description. It's listed as a standalone, and of course, now there's book 6 that's available for pre-order.
Is it up to 6? Yeah, I thought it was book 4 that was available for pre-order. Right? Okay, I'm
no.
I did this with the Honorverse too, as I told you last night. I waited for David to get a couple of out, and next thing I knew, there were 50 books in the series and a new one coming out every 6 weeks.
Guardian, Valkyrie, Janus, Veltal, Dyson, and Thermopylae.
Okay. Do they all have the word protocol in them?
No. 3 of them have protocol and 3 of them have file.
Okay.
So they're like 2 miniseries within a larger series.
Okay.
So the protocol books are like the big existential threats. Like, if this is allowed to occur, then, or allowed to fester, then all of reality is going to get destroyed, and we need to solve it by having fleets of time machines clash in epic battles. Whereas the file books have a much tighter focus and are police procedurals. Like the Janus file, which is book 3, is at its core a murder mystery.
Oh, okay. Always fun to combine murder mysteries and time travel. Always fun. Always fun. Okay, so that's what you've done with those, but what else might you be working on with David Weber?
So, David has invited me to write in the Honorverse, and specifically to tell the story of Edward Saganami. So right now, Tom and I have been hard at work on the pre-planning for that series, and in specific the book 1. We are planning 3 books. To basically follow Edward Saganami from a lieutenant junior grade all the way to his final battle aboard Nike. And I gotta say, just thinking about writing that final battle gives me chills.
Yeah. So Tom.
Yeah.
As the keeper of all things Honorverse, as much as anybody is, explain who Edward Saganami was and why we care.
Edward Saganami David's described him in many different ways. The easiest way to describe him is the John Paul Jones of the Manticoran Navy. He is the icon of the Navy that showed them, that kind of crystallized what the Navy was in terms of sort of tactical thought and the way the Navy worked, the core ethos of the Manticoran Navy, all the way through honors time. They still talk about him. They talk about how he affected the way the Navy works, the way they think about problems, and he doesn't exist in a vacuum, of course, but he is the centerpiece of the Navy. He's the great naval hero, the first winner of the Parliamentary Medal of Valor posthumously, and a lot of his DNA has been sort of woven through the Manticoran Navy for the next 200 years.
Okay, so he's a character who's approximately 200 years before the mainline Honor Harrington series.
More or less.
Okay, and so if I remember correctly, the Travis books. So talk about the Travis books and put those in sort of context.
So Travis books are earlier. Travis books are another 50 years in the past, or 100 years in the past. And they both, they have long lifespans, and the books cover a long period. In the Travis books, we're really looking at the Navy starting to understand what a wartime fighting force looks like from a peacetime force, starting to understand how to grow as a Navy, as a fighting force. And we're following someone who's kind of the anti-honor. He's always in the background. He's instrumental in a lot of the formation of the Navy as well, but he's not seen like Saganami is or like Honor is. He's just not that. He's not that kind of person. But he's there. He's there a lot of the pivotal points, and he's pushing the Navy in a lot of pivotal points. So we explore that a lot with Tim Zahn. David and Tim and I are exploring there, and then we will have a gap as the Navy evolves and as warfighting evolves, because we're in this era where the ships have moved from the original spin ships with no grav plates, with no sidewall gun ports. So everything, all of your focus is forward. You have to basically face the enemy. You have to cross your own T to fire. And now we've got ships that they can be sleeker because they don't need giant spin sections, and they can fire out the gun ports on the side. So you can fire from behind the protection of the sidewall. And so it is a sea change, pardon my expression, in tactical thought. And Saganami is right on. He's not at the very beginning of it. Travis is not at the very end. Saganami is not at the very beginning. There's a gap between them that we need to. Jacob and I are already talking about how we're doing that transition, how we're building that transition. But Saganami is coming right as that wave crests, and he's the one who's figuring out how do we put this together into a warfighting force? How do we put this together into new doctrine, into really thinking about specifically in Saganami's case, the battle cruiser, and how do we build this doctrine around the small, fast, short, sharp engagements, not the big walls of battle. They exist. People are thinking about that, but Saganami's not thinking about that. He's getting stuff done while the walls of battle is sitting, basically keeping the Manticore system safe from any ever return of the Volkswagens or anything like them. So we really get to explore. The foundation in every way of the Manticoran Navy, the two biggest points of foundation for the Manticoran Navy, and how they work through that transition.
Is this similar to the transition between sail and steam? I mean, the technology is obviously very different, but is that kind of the?
It may be it may have the same order of magnitude. Warfighting is changing drastically.
Okay.
And it is certainly changing. It is similar in that there's going to be some overlap. And we're talking, in fact, Jacob and I had a meeting, it was just last week. We started talking about what ships we're going to put in the first book. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at this mix. So Saganami's gotten, Manticore Navy has modernized, and they've got, and most of what all of what Saganami has are modern built ships. They have, honest to goodness, side facing, broadsides and gun ports. They're all early generation, but they were recognizable to any reader of what I call the modern Honorverse series. But the antagonists are going to have a mix of some modern ships, some modernized ships, some old spin ships. They're going to have all, we're going to get to see all different pieces. And I think we're going to have a lot of that because ships are expensive, and figuring out how these ships function and how these ships used to fight. And everybody was sort of evolving in this direction of, let's make the best possible warfighting platform that's designed to fire out the front, and someone says, hey, now we can shoot out the side. That drastically changes things.
Yeah.
And there's been some lines where people have gone far enough down there. It's like, we can't get away from that. We have to just throw the ship away. So in that way, it's in some ways it'll be kind of early Dreadnought Revolution, where entire ideas will come and go before they're ever used in combat.
Yeah, armored cruisers. It's sort of like the demise of armored cruisers.
Yeah.
David is extremely good. I say this as a naval analyst. David is extremely good about understanding how naval history works and running it through the science fiction converter without just simply filing off the serial numbers. When he runs it through the science fiction converter, he turns the converter on, which not everybody does. And he uses it as sort of a model about how to approach thinking about the problem, not as just, surface Navy cruiser, space cruiser, that sort of stuff, right? And so like when he goes from battleships to dreadnoughts to super dreadnoughts, he can explain the changes that led from one to the other and the effect it had on the fleets that occurred previously. And it's not just because in the real world ships got bigger, so in his universe ships got bigger. He can explain it down to the technical details, and then he follows through with figuring out what are the implications of that. And it's also not just that everything gets better all the time. Tom and I were having a conversation earlier yesterday when we were talking about pod knots and the design of ships. Pod knots have this tremendous increase in offensive capability, but actually those ships are more fragile than the ships they replaced. And so, it turned it into a long range gunnery duel, but you got to be careful. You got to be careful with those ships that you don't get caught.
There are always trade-offs.
There's always trade-offs. There's always trade-offs, right? One of the trade-offs with aircraft carriers in World War II is now I've got 100,000 gallons of 200 octane aviation gasoline on board. That could be bad. That could be bad. This incidentally is the reason why any of those ships that you saw that were like an aircraft carrier on the backside and a battleship on the front side, that ain't happening. It's just not going to happen. It is not a good idea when you're talking about that kind of fuel and the implications of that. So, okay, so how many books are there in the Travis series? Travis
There are
series?
4 right now. We're working on book 5. There will be 6 total.
Okay, all right, and so we've got another 2 planned on coming out in that. There's the currently trilogy, but it's going to end up being like 25 books eventually in the Saganami.
No, he dies, so we're okay.
There's a very definitive end that has already been plotted out.
But did he have kids? So in any event, that's probably going to be limited just because he does die and they're working in the past.
Yeah.
And so David's got a couple of other Honorverse books planned on sort of like, there's a Crown of Slaves book that's planned, I believe. And I can't remember, is there a Saganami book planned? Shadow of Saganami, that's that series?
One of the things
Michelle
we were
Henke,
talking
et cetera, et
about
cetera.
earlier this weekend is we need to sit down with David and really look at the threads and look at where he wants to cap things off, where things are already capped off, and where he wants us to start looking, and just where we're going to be focusing, where we're not. So
Yeah.
I don't believe there's another Shadow of Psychonomy book in
Okay.
but I could be wrong.
I know that at one point, and there's been a few books that have come out since then, but at one point Bob Lewis made the comment that by his count there were 25 unresolved threads. I never went back and independently confirmed that. And some threads are more important than others.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm looking at we're looking at sort of big picture threads right now. Where the little ooh shiny ferrets, they're more than 25. Guarantee you that.
More anthologies.
More anthologies, more anthologies.
So one of the things Jacob and I have been spending the last year doing is just getting a feel for the Navy that Saganami is living in, and how it's different from the modern Navy, how it's different from Travis's Navy, because it's an evolutionary step between the two. And so we're spending a lot of time with that. We're also spending time soon trying to build the tools to do the things that David is doing in the other books. Tools for doing intercept calculations, and how are we going to plot things out, how are we going to write things, and how are we going to make certain that we're respectful to what people are expecting from these books.
So that sounds pretty good. So we're actually at an hour, so we're getting close to the end here. So I've got one last question for Tom. Tom, what do you think of Anton Chekhov as a playwright?
Has anybody noticed?
I don't know. I haven't seen anything. Is anybody out there in TV land? So why don't you go ahead and show it for everybody?
We were wondering if anybody would notice this. This is entirely a passion project that I had. This was my sanity project a few months ago. So some of you who've read the Honorverse books or read the early works we did with Ad Astra Games, in Jane's intelligence review, we had the Manticore and Marine Corps pages, and we talked about the pulse rifle. In House of Steel, we also had a different version of this pulse rifle. So Thomas Maroney and I worked on this. It's the first project, or the second maybe, we ever worked on. And now I have version 0 that I can hold in my hand and show off to people, and find all the things that are wrong with it, and make a new version. So yeah, this is. David has not seen this yet. You've seen this before David now, but he'll see this before the con is over, and I'll have to pry it out of his hands and tell him, no, you can't have this one because it's not done yet. You're getting the next one; it'll be better.
And so, in usual fashion, between BU9 and the Royal Manticore Navy, the Honor Harrington Fan Club, earlier today, we had in this room BU9 member Pete Gordon, who's a retired Army. Trying to remember if he's was a warrant officer, or whether he was a
Don't know.
Offhand, I cannot.
Yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember. But retired after years and years of service in the Army, and so we also had a retired Canadian Navy enlisted sailor, and so I'm sorry,
Underhill. Bill Underhill.
Bill Underhill. Thank you. I couldn't remember his name, so I wasn't going to guess. And they were looking it over, and it's like, okay, you got this issue, and like one of them, hand me the weapon real quick. Like one of them that Pete had was that maybe you don't want to have both the magazines at the same level, because when you're actually in combat and you're trying to do things by feel, having them at different levels will aid your ability. How did he describe it? Combat braille or something like that?
Yeah, something, yes.
that it'll help you sort of figure that stuff out. That's one of the nifty things about working with the fan club and working with my fellow BU9 members is that,
even if it's plastic.
Yeah. Is that there's a lot of professional experience that we're able to tap into to get professional opinion on stuff. So I am the last person in the world you want to ask about firearms. And about what the ergonomics should be, although that didn't stop me from expressing an opinion about that hand grip.
That model is so good that when the barrel was pointed at me, I actually felt my blood pressure go up.
Yeah, and
even though I know it's just a hunk of
There's no-
plastic and it's a
and there's no
sci-fi
hole.
weapon.
I mean, there's like no
it's
hole.
also very it's informative watching, like, because I've been watching everybody I've handed it to, and I can tell the people who've been in the military because I see their they hold it like this and their finger immediately indexes off the trigger.
Yeah.
They're very aware of where that barrel is at every given time when they move it. There's making certain they're not sweeping anybody. For the most part, they're not thinking about who might be in the room up above. But yeah, people who spend time around firearms spend a lot of time thinking of where you were pointing it, and so it's always informative to watch.
So, but that's a pretty nifty little project. So, and there are other nifty projects we're working on. I'm hoping that at some point we will be able to show some of the other nifty projects, and I'm expecting that everybody who's in this room is going to be on a show on Starfleet Tactical again, starting with me next week. I don't yet know what I'm going to talk about. I don't yet know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's exactly the way I want to phrase that. I don't yet know what the topic is going to be, but I can tell you that I currently have open on my iPad 3 different tabs from Robert Work. You may recall that back about 2-3 months ago, when we talked about the literal combat ship, I pulled from one of Bob Work's things a little bit on that and talking about that story. And I said that I would come back because Bob Work was one of the people who said, hey, this is how combat seems to be moving towards. And the littoral combat ship or the literal combat ship would be useful in that regard. And he had a coherent sort of idea, a coherent concept of employment as to why we should have that ship and why it would be useful. Now, in the long run, there were problems with that ship, both in terms of how the Navy went about procuring it. I do not speak for my employer, any employer, past, present, or future, but problems in how the Navy went about procuring it, how the story sort of shifted over time, and in the end, there were problems with the actual gear. So even if the Navy had delivered, even if what had been delivered had been exactly what the Navy was saying that it needed at the time, it was still stuff that broke. And so there's been a big problem with that. But it's worth going back and looking at what Bob Work said about that originally, because he's a frighteningly smart guy. And he had sort of the right attitude about this. He said, hey, this looks like where warfare is going. Throwing some money at this to conduct some experiments will actually know if this is useful or not. We won't know until we do it. And so from that standpoint, it's an interesting experiment. It's worth going back and looking at Bob Work stuff. So I've got three different things from Bob Work I'm looking at, planning on getting to. I'm also planning on doing Martin Doherty's, taking a look at Martin Doherty's explanation about the Imperial Navy and Traveler. There's a couple of pubs from him that I'm currently working my way through. I've reread the one, I'm reading the other one for the first time. And so he's got a very interesting model that will tie back to what I said about Julian Corbett, going back probably 6-8 months ago now, when I talked about Corbett and the flotilla versus the battle fleet and things like that. So as I tell people, my science fiction fandom superpowers that I can talk about real world navies and science fiction navies at the same time. So if you come back next week and the week after and the week after, you'll get to hear me do that. And so next week we're back to a regular open listed show at 10 o'clock here on the Aries Studio channel. And I'd like to thank Brant Guillory for the opportunity to participate in the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. And I would like to thank Peter Gold, Tom Pope, and Jacob Holo for being on the show tonight. Any last words from any of you?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, and LYSSA is not on the show tonight because she wasn't feeling well, and so she's got the flu or something like that. But I'm hoping that she'll be back next week. So LYSSA, if you're listening, I hope you get well soon. So with that, everybody, thank you very much. Come on. Are you one of those people who can't do it? Oh no, you could do it. You could do it. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and See you all next week.